Hey everyone, today we are going to cover lecture 10 for this course. So in this video lecture, we're going to cover economic growth as well as we're going to look into institutional PPC. We're also going to see in a free market economy, how the economy revives, or like how recession happens in economy and how the economy self-corrects itself from the recession, and how overheated economy happens and how the economy self-corrects itself from the inflation or high inflation. So objectives of this lecture is to describe what brings about long-run economic growth, determine what a society can do to get the economy grow faster. We will also look into the conditions that could lead to long-run economic decline or recession. We'll also look at something called institutional PPC and compare it versus physical PPC, which is the production possibility frontier. If you remember, we discussed about this in the beginning of this class, but we are going to discuss some of this topic in depth now. We're going to talk about the description of principal economic problem in an underperforming economy and how it self-corrects itself. And then at the same thing, we're going to see the description of principal economic problem in an overheated economy and how it self-corrects itself. So what is long-run economic growth? Um, a long run economic growth means that the economy of a country or a society needs to grow over time, which means the GDP number has to be growing over the time. Okay, now we have seen that the GDP fluctuates up and down, but the long term trend has to be upwards in order for us to achieve economic growth. Okay, so a society must decide what combination of capital goods and consumer goods they must use in order to meet its current and future wants and needs. So, just to define, consumer goods are the final goods and services, and it is the end product that a business produce and purchase and consumed by the consumers. So, whatever we buy in the market as consumers and buyers, those are known as consumer goods. Some examples of consumer goods would be like what we are buying grocery from the Walmart. That's a consumer good because we are buying finished product like toothpaste, or let's say tomatoes, or let's say if you're buying gas from the gas station, that's also a consumer goods because it is a finished product that we as buyers are buying for our consumption. Okay, so consumer goods are goods that are bought by the consumers in the market. Examples would include grocery items, liquor, then gas. If you're paying tuition for your education, that's also a consumer service. So these are examples of consumer goods. On the other hand, we have capital goods. So what are capital goods? Capital goods are assets that are used by the businesses in order to produce final goods and services. So in other words, capital goods are actually bought by the businesses, not by the consumers. And the businesses buy capital goods and they use these capital goods to basically produce the consumer goods or to produce the final goods and services, right? So things like raw materials, cotton, that businesses buy in order to make a shirt would be a capital good. Okay, or if they buy aluminum to buy some doors or some vehicles or metals, then that metal is a capital good because those goods are used and assembled to create a final good, which is the car. Okay, so that's the difference between consumer goods and capital goods. Consumer goods are used up by the consumers at the present time, whereas capital goods are used by businesses, but their purpose is to produce final goods and services that will be used or consumed in the future. So consumer goods focuses more on the present or current, and capital goods focuses more on the future. And that's what this first line talks about in this slide is that society must decide what combination of current and future goods they want to do in the economy. Okay, so this is actually represented through the production possibility frontier in a graph, and that's what we're going to show. So the graph usually looks like we'll have like here, if we see we have capital goods. Just look at the first one. We're talking about the first one now. We're talking about this one now. So we have capital goods and we have consumer goods, right? We have capital goods on the left, on the y-axis and consumer goods on the x-axis, and the production possibility curve usually looks like this. At point B, if the economy is at point B, it means more this economy has more capital goods and less consumer goods. But if we are at point A, that means this economy prefers more consumer goods versus less capital goods. So economy operating at point B is more focused on the future, and an economy at operating at point A is more focused in meeting the needs of the current demand, or the society is spending more on consumer goods versus capital goods. So that's what we are seeing. Like here, if you see here, we have more capital goods but less, just a little bit of capital goods. On the other hand, at point B, we have a lot of capital goods but less of consumer goods. Okay, so again, a society must decide. It depends what their goal is. Neither point A nor point B are good or bad. It depends on how the economy is doing and what the economy wants to achieve. Based on that, they will operate on this curve of the PPF. So going back to the slide, the different combinations of the on the PPC or on the production possibility frontier graph emphasize whether society chooses capital goods or consumer goods over one another. So when the society has more or better resources or factors of production, so if a society has more better capital goods, and or when there is technological advancement, the graph or the PPC curve will be pushed outwards or to the right, and that reflects economic growth. Okay, so I'm going to draw a graph in a bit that's going to reflect economic growth. And this economic growth ultimately increases the standard of the living of the people in the economy. And if the society chooses to be at point B combination, that which I showed earlier, they will experience higher economic growth in the future because they are investing more on capital goods, which will be used to produce more consumer goods in the future. So in the future, they will experience more economic growth versus point A, because point A, we are using more of the society is using up more for consumer goods versus future goods, as they're spending less on capital goods. Okay, so at point B, more capital goods are produced than, and at point A, more consumer goods are produced. So we are going to see more economic growth if the economy is operating at point B. So of course, if we are at point B here, we are better off than point A. So as I was saying, I'm going to do a graph of economic growth. So we have this original graph, and this is point B, and this is point A. So if we are at point B, we are going to have a bigger shift to the right because we are spending more on capital goods or on future goods. So we will have more goods in the future. And if we are at point A, which means we are spending more on consumer goods and very little on capital goods, therefore we're going to have very little economic growth. So the PPF will shift to the right, but not much as the first one. So when we are operating at point B, we are going to experience more economic growth. When we are operating at point A, we are going to experience some economic growth, but the shift will be less. Okay. Now, the opposite can also happen. An economy not necessarily will always experience economic growth, right? An economy can experience recession or an economic decline. They are the same things. So when there is a destruction of resources or factors of production get destroyed, or there is a technological blackout, then we will see that the PPF graph will shift to the left. If the society's birth rate declines, if the population is declining, that means in the future there will be less labor in the market, there will be less labor resource, and there will be a degradation in the quality of the workers. So this will cause the factor of production to go down, and as a result, the PPS or PPC curve will shift to the left. Again, if another thing that can cause the PPC to shift to the left is if the quality of the factors of production decrease, or if the quality of the labor, such as they are not trained or educated or they do not have any educational background, then the quality of the labor will decline and the PPC and PPF graph will shift to the left. Again, technological blackouts can cause shifts to the left or inwards, and which also means that the standard of living for the country will decline. So if we are here, if this is the original PPC, yeah, this is the original PPC. Now, if there is an economic decline due to destruction of factors of production, such as the quality of the labor goes down, or the birth rate has declined, or maybe a technological blackout has happened, in that case, the PPC will shift to the left and the economy will shrink, which means the standard of living of the people will decline. So the PPF graph helps us to understand where we are at, and if there are shifts, if based on the PPC and PPF, we can tell if the economy is spending more on capital goods versus consumer goods or consumer goods versus capital goods. And also it helps us to understand if there are shifts, we can tell if the economy is growing over the years or if the economy is shrinking or declining over the years. So moving on to the next slide. A society can no longer produce the combination of capital goods and consumer goods if they experience long-run economic decline. Because think about it, the PPF has shifted to the left, right? So they cannot produce the same old combination of capital goods and consumer goods now. So what happens is basically their spending is going down now, so they will have lower combination of capital and consumer goods under in the shifted in the inward shifted PPC, and therefore the standard of living will fall, right? In certain developing countries, such as Zimbabwe or some other African countries, when this happens, all resources need to be used to produce consumer goods, right? They have to first meet the demand of the existing customers or existing consumers, and so the economy decides to spend all of their resources on consumers goods and very less on capital goods. When this happens, they do not experience any economic growth. And at the same time, these economy usually experience increase in population. As the society increases, the population also increases. The society decreases, the societal the PPC shifts to the left, we see economic decline, but the population grows at the same time. So it becomes very difficult for this type of economies to come out of this type of situation. And the standard of living continues to decline in a spiral. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to explain. Like in the PPC, when there is an economic decline and it shifts to the left, in certain developing countries such as Zimbabwe, they will now have to spend most of their resources for consumer goods to meet the existing demand of the customers. As a result, they will not be able to spend much on the capital goods, right? So, when we don't spend much on the capital goods, there will be very little economic growth to no economic growth. But at the same time, these countries also experience high population growth. When that happens, the standard of living declines, and it's like a spiral problem, and it's very difficult for these countries to come up out of this situation. So some of the short run economic problems, like we have seen in the business cycles, in the short run, the GDP changes from year to years. And they're not usually increasing at the steady rate. Like in the short run, we see ups and downs in the GDP, right? So they are not always increasing. At times, they are decreasing also. Again, I'm trying to remind you that remember the business cycle from chapter 8. The business cycle tells us that during the recovery and expansion phase, the economy can sometimes grow at a faster rate than the long run trade. Remember, the long run trend is upwards, but sometimes the curves can go above that long run trend. So that means in the short run, sometimes they can grow at a faster rate than the long run trend, or sometimes during the recession phase, the economy can decline or grow at a very slower pace compared to the long run trend. And ultimately, when you average this faster rate in the short run and the slower rate in the short run, we get the average long run trend curve. So when we have these variations in GDP, that is what leads us to economic problems, which the society and the government has to deal with. So, for instance, the society has institutionalized the 40-hour work week, overtime pay, child labor laws, minimum wage laws, and unemployment compensation laws. All of these reduce the number of labor hours. So again, remember going back to the curve and original PPC we are going to talk about. Let's say we have a PPC between capital goods and consumer goods, right? So this curve looks like this. Now, when remember, if the economy is operating on the line, that means we are using all the resources completely, right? That means we are fully using the resources and the economy is productively efficient. There is no inefficiency. If we are inside the curve, anytime we are operating inside the curve, that is inefficiency. That reflects inefficiency. We learned this in our previous lecture. But now, what we are trying to say is society has institutionalized some of the laws for which we cannot be reaching these points. We cannot be, even if we want, we cannot be at these points. For instance, if a company can make labor work for 24 hours a day, right? A day has 24 hours and people can work 24 hours a day, right? But in reality, the law does not allow you that. So going back to the slide, like, the society or the economy has institutionalized that workers will only work 8 hours a day or 40 hours per week. That is the normal time. If there is overtime they're working, then there needs to be extra payment. Then we cannot use the children, right? They are minors. So there are minor or child labor laws which prevents companies from hiring these minors to perform the production activities. Also, there is minimum wage laws that there are certain minimum wage has to be paid to the labor. So that means the cost will go up. Some labor may be willing to accept lower wages, but again, the law says you have to pay 7.25 as the minimum wage. Also, there's unemployment compensation laws. So when someone is unemployed, the government has to pay out unemployment benefits. All these things do not allow us to operate on this curve, on this original curve. So basically, because of these institutionalized laws, the the society has a PPC that is actually lower than the actual PPC. So this is basically your actual PPC of the society because of institutionalized, right? So and that is what is known as institutional PPC. So this one, the outer PPC is called physical PPC, and this is when we have full employment, which means we are using all the resources in the society. But in reality, because of certain laws and restrictions, and because of in order to make sure our quality of life makes sense, we are unable to operate in the society in this curve. So, this is the actual PPF, which is our goal to be at. And this PPF is known as institutional PPC because this PPC has been limited by various laws of the society. Okay, the society has decided to restrict the access to many natural resources as well. I was just talking about labor laws, but at the same time think about natural resources, which is a land resource, right? Land is a type of resource, but society also has restrictions in terms of natural resources, right? For instance, we do not use the natural resources in the state and natural parks and forests. There are a lot of tree timber in the national and state parks, but companies cannot cut those down because of environmental reasons and because of laws. So we are not able to use up those resources. That is why we have an institutional PPC, which is lower than the physical PPC. Because at the physical PPC, we are assuming we are using all the resources in the society without any restrictions. But in reality, that doesn't happen. So in reality, we are actually the institutional PPC, which is basically using up all the resources at maximum level that is allowed by the law. Now, in terms of, it can be in terms of labor, in terms of capital, in terms of land and entrepreneur as well. So think about in terms of capital, society also does not use some technologically that are available to them, such as nuclear power and DDT, right? Nuclear power is very dangerous. So people do not use that on a day-to-day life, but that is available there, right? But we do not use that technology. So that's another limitation that causes the physical PPC to shift to the institutional PPC. So all of these put constraints on the society's ability to maximize production. The institutional constraints imposed by society have been adopted to improve the lives of the citizens. Again, the reason we have these laws in place, such as child labor laws, unemployment benefits, then minimum wage laws. The goal of this is to improve the quality of the life of the people, right? Think about it. If we were working 24 hours a day, we wouldn't have any family time. We wouldn't have any personal time. We couldn't have any time to rest. We would have been working and working and working, which does not make sense, right? So the trade-off society is willing to accept for this, the society is willing to accept a loss of production of material satisfaction for an improved quality of life, right? the Because we are trying to improve the quality of life, in return we are willing to give up some of the output that can be produced. Hence, in reality, or in the real society, full employment is achieved when we are operating at any point on the institutional PPC, not on the physical PPC, because that is not reality. That is not something actually ever happens. So anytime we are on the institutional PPC, that means we are at full employment. And this becomes the short run economic goals of the society. If the society is operating on any point on the institutional PPC, so anytime the economy is on the institutional PPC, we are at full employment. So going back to the curve, if we are operating on the institutional PPC, which is this one, the second one, the lower one, then we are at full employment. So this is basically when we are closing or near the peak of the business cycle. Now, of course, remember the economy in the short run fluctuates a lot. It can grow, it can decline during recession period, and during recovery and growth period, it will grow at a faster rate than the long-term trend, right? So we're going to look into that scenario. First, we are going to look into an underperforming economy. So if the economy falls into a recession, if the economy is going through a recession or economic decline, it is moving away from the full employment curve, right? So again, let's go back to the graph. We're going to look at an underperforming economy. Now, let's say this is your physical PPC, right? But we cannot operate on physical PPC because we have these institutional laws and regulations, so we can never be at physical PPC. But then we are on this curve, which is your institutional PPC, and when we are operating on institutional PPC, that's when we are operating on this institutional PPC, that's when we are at full employment. Okay, so this is our short-term economic goal. Now, if the economy is going through a recession, this curve will shift to the left, and the curve will shift to the left, or it will shrink inwards. So it moves inwards into an area of inefficient point. Okay, so anytime we are operating below this institutional PPC, we are at an inefficient point. Remember, this is from the previous lecture. So we are at an inefficient point now. And the reason that happens is because when recession happens, business sales will fall. When recession happens, people start demanding less. So what happens is businesses will not be able to sell consumers goods in the market. As a result, inventory of consumer goods and final goods and services will build up. Retailers will cut back factory orders. When retailers will cut back factory orders, it will also, the factory itself will reduce their production because they see there's less orders out there, so they don't want to produce a lot of goods because there's a lot of inventory in the market already, so they will cut down production. When this happens, the companies will lay off their salespeople as well as production workers, and as a result unemployment will rise, GDP will decrease because we are producing less output and production decreases, and this process will continue until production will be exactly equal to the new sales amount. Okay, so to explain this process, let me look into this. Okay, so let's say we have a recession now, and how does the recession happens? Okay, so first, when there's no recession, we are going to have a situation when sales in the market will be exactly equal to the production, which means demand is equals to supply in the market. Demand is equals to supply. But now, for some reason, let's say your sales, the business sales, goes down because demand has gone down. When that happens, this means sales is now less than production, correct? Because now people are demanding less, but there's a lot of supply in the market. So demand is less than supply. So what happens in the market for the inventory of goods? The inventory of goods go up, rise, which is a bad thing. So when this happens, retailers reduce orders because they first need to clear out their inventory, right? So retailers reduce orders, and in return, factories cut production because they have reduction in orders. It doesn't make sense for them to produce more, so they'll cut down this production. As a result, salespeople and production or factory workers will be laid off, so unemployment will go up, which means we have recession, unemployment goes up, and GDP falls. Okay, so that is what happens during a recession. This is what's exactly happened. And this is going to continue until the sales is equal to production. That's when the economy will come back to equilibrium. But how does that happen? The economy will self-correct itself to come back to this position where sales is equals to production, right? Because we are having a decrease in sales, but at the same time, production decreases, and as so, therefore, we're going to experience recession. But the economy in a free market society will self-correct itself so that we come back to the situation where sales is equals to production, and that's what we are going to look at right now. So let's see how the economy self-corrects itself. So a dynamic market economy that is free and does not have a lot of government interference, when it experiences an economic decline, it will start to correct itself. The economy reaches the trough in the business cycle, and then the decrease in real GDP will stop. At this point, the recovery will begin. And basically, the recovery happens in both the product market and the labor market. Okay, so what happens in the product market? There is a buildup of inventory, right? Because sales has declined, there is a lot of inventory of final goods and services in the market. So there is a surplus, there's too much supply in the market, but there's less demand. At the same time, producers are not producing any new output right now. So how they can sell this extra inventory in the market? What the producers do is they will mark down their prices so that it clears the inventory and move out unsold goods. As prices will go down, people's demand will go up, so business sales will increase. They'll start buying now because prices are lower. It's cheaper now, so they will buy now. Hence, now sales has gone up, so the business will start hiring more salespeople, and ultimately the overstock or the surplus is gone from the factories, and the factory order increases. Now they see there's more demand, so the retailers start ordering placing more orders to the factories, and the factories increase their production, so they will start hiring more labor, so production goes up. That's what happens in the product market, which helps the economy to self correct itself. Same also, we are going to see self corrections in the labor market, okay, when the economy is underperforming. So when we see a surplus in the labor market, and this causes a downward pressure on the wages as some unemployed workers. Remember, when there is economic recession, there will be people laid off from their workers, so they don't have any jobs, they don't have any income. So there will be a downward pressure on the wages. So wages will go down, and some of the unemployed workers now will be ready to accept jobs at lower wages, right? At least something is better than nothing. So that's what's going to happen. So lower wages will cause increase in hiring, right? So when businesses see that it's cheaper to hire labor, they will start hiring more. But this process is very slow as businesses are reluctant to expand quickly to a sudden increase in demand. So when they lay off workers, but then they experience an increase in demand in the product market, they don't immediately hire people right away. They want to wait and make the wisest decision. And that's why this the process is slow, right? Businesses want to make sure that the economy is indeed improving before committing to expansion. They want to make sure this is not a one-time event. It's actually the economy is moving towards growth and it is expanding. So, and the recession is over. So that's when they want to hire people. They just don't want to hire right away. Also, sometimes during recessions, some businesses will reorganize their operations and eliminate some departments. And they usually don't bring back those departments back. So they will not hire those the unemployed workers. So unemployed rate is slow and it's a combination of cyclical and structural. Okay. So the self-correction process continues and finally unemployment rate decreases. It's a very slow process, but then the unemployment rate decreases slowly. Income and sales increase, and so does production and GDP. The recovery turns into expansion. Now the economy has gone out of recovery and it has started growing, so it goes into the expansion mode and it eventually marches back to the full employment and moves back to the institutional PPC point, where we are at a lower inflation rate but we are at full employment level. So that's how we see how we're going to have corrections in the product market and labor market when the economy is going through a recession, but corrections in the labor market will be very slow because businesses are very careful before hiring a lot of workers. The opposite case or the opposite scenario can also happen. We can have a situation when the economy is overheated, okay? And when this happens, basically the major problem is inflation. During recession, the major problem is unemployment, and during overheated economy, the major problem is inflation. Now, the society wants to buy and consume more goods and services than the institutional PPC can provide. So people's demand has gone up so much right now that they want to buy more. So under overheated economy, we have a situation. This is the physical. Okay, this is the physical PPC, and this is the institutional PPC. When we are operating at the point when we are operating on the graph of the institutional PPC, we are at full employment. That's what we discussed. If we are inside, that's when we are inefficient. Now, if we are operating in between the physical PPC and institutional PPC, here. Anytime we are going outside the institutional PPC, but below the physical PPC, we experience overheated economy. That's when what it means is people have a lot of demand for products in the market, but there's a shortage of goods and services or shortage of final goods and services in the market. So in reality, in this case, overheated economy, demand is greater than supply. So we experience shortage in the market. Okay, that's what I showed you in the graph. So according to the graph, you will see in an overheated economy, the society is at point Z. So anything, let's say this point is point Z. So it is beyond the institutional PPC, but again, below the physical PPC, of course, because outside the physical PPC is not possible unless we see some technological advancements or anything like that. So at point Z, the society wants a combination of goods that lies outside the institutional PPC. And the economy is has shortage. Basically, there's too much demand, but there's less um, shortage. So it eventually leads to inflation, which means the prices will go up. So at this time, unemployment is abnormally low and below full employment. Okay, so even when we have overheated economy, we are going to be actually below full employment. But again, we have high inflation. So as the economy tries to push beyond full employment into the overheated area, sales order rise, but production cannot match up with the sales. So there is a shortage in the market and inventory is depleted. When we will go into the market in Walmart or other grocery stores, we will see most of the items are gone. We cannot find the items that we want because there's so much demand. So producers will try to expand to fill the backlog orders, but they are constrained by the maximum capacity. Again, business and producers see, oh wow, there's so much demand, so we want to increase more of our production because there's so much orders. But unfortunately, we do not have enough resources that we can hire so we can meet these demands. There are shortages in raw materials, there are shortages in the skilled labor market. There's not enough skilled workers out there that we can hire and do the production. So ultimately, the production will be backlogged and there will be a shortage in the market. Okay, and this will eventually lead to inflation. But when we have this situation in a free dynamic market, the economy will again self-correct itself because when there are shortages in the labor and raw material, it will cause their cost to rise and profits for the businesses are squeezed. So what they will do at that time is they will start cutting back on production because right now the cost of resources or factors of production such as natural resources and labor has gone up and the businesses are making less profit now. So what will they do? They will cut down production and at the same time they will increase the price of the products because now they see there's a lot of demand for the product. So they want to make more money because the cost of the resources also has gone up. They will also increase the prices so they can cover up this increase in cost of the resources, right? So previously eager buyers now will reduce their demand. Now that the prices have gone up, eager buyers will slowly decrease their demand, and as a result, sales will decrease. And this will bring when sales is back to equal to the production, the economy will be back to equilibrium again. Even in an overheated economy, we will see adjustments in the product market and labor market. Okay, in the product market, shortages will cause price to rise. So price of goods and services will go up, and as a result, sales will decrease. Okay, and when this happens, and this will continue until sales is equals to production, and there is no shortage in the market in that case. Also, in the raw material and labor markets, the prices will go up now that labor see that, oh, I have so much demand from the business, I want to charge higher wages. So their wages will go up, which basically means the cost of production for businesses will go up and their profits will be squeezed, so they will decrease hiring more people. So right now, some people will start losing jobs or will not get jobs, and as a result, the abnormally low unemployment level, will come back to the full employment level. And then, as the buyers demand less, the upward pressure on price goes away, and the economy returns to full employment and back to the institutional PPC, and then inflation is adjusted also. So sometimes this self-correction of the economy by itself takes a very long time. And people and businesses and consumers, they don't want to wait for a long period of time to to solve the economy. Nobody wants to stay unemployed for a long period of time because the economy is going to take a long time to self-adjust itself, right? or nobody wants to pay high prices for goods and services with very limited choices because of inflation for a long period of time. So that's when we have the government come in as an agent to solve this problem, right? So the government as an agent of the society can help to expedite the recovery process or the correction process, or they can try to decrease the pace of the overheatedness, okay, so that the economy comes back to equilibrium. So government actions are implemented to hurry the correction or expedite the correction, along with including implementation or changes in economic policy. And they will do that by changing economic policies, which has more quicker impact on the economy rather than the slow self-correction process. Some of these policies that the government undertakes to solve, unemployment, inflation, are fiscal policy and monetary policy, which we are going to cover at some point in the class, towards the later part of the class. So that's the end of this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to look at the macro model, and we're going to see the relationship between inflation and inflation, and we're also going to learn the how the macro model performs, um, or how we can use the macro model to understand full employment, underperforming, or an overheated economy. We have seen the PPC in this curve, the production possibility curve, or the production possibility frontier. But then we also have another economic model called macro model, which we can use to understand these different scenarios. And that's what we're going to discuss in the next class. But that is it for now. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.